we're up to chapter 35, which is found on page 386. So cheers, l'chaim, everybody. There was a question posed by one of our eminent students for the recording. I'm going to paraphrase your question, but basically, is life all about just struggling? So that invariably, the vast majority of us are never going to become complete tzaddik and righteous people. And frankly speaking, the vast majority of us are not going to become a Beinimim either. I mean, that's just in terms of reality. Potentially, yes, we could sort of hit that level of Beinimim, but most people are not going to. So ultimately, what's the objective? Just to struggle in life? Is like life just all about struggling, getting up every day and struggling, fighting the good fight, and keep going and keep going? Is God somehow just enjoying the show of watching his creation struggle day in, day out? Couldn't he have not made it a lot easier and not made us struggle? The same God that made us, created us with an evil inclination, a good inclination, and struggling could have made it a lot easier for us too. Just change some of the recipe, so to speak. So that's to some degree the theme of the class tonight, which I'm going to address throughout the class. Okay, and if it's not clear yet, then we can. By the time we're finished, I'll kind of recap it. Page 30, chapter 35, page 386. So it's titled "Your Struggle is Worth It." Section 1: The Purpose of Endless Struggle. So, if you remember that's a while ago, but kind of at the beginning of the class, in the preface, or like the first opening page before Tanya starts herself, the cover sheet, if you will, it says that Tanya is based on one particular verse from the book of Deuteronomy, and that is, it that is near to you to do, okay? The thing is very near to you, but in your mouth, in your heart, to do it. What is the thing that we're talking about? What we're talking about is basically connecting yourself to Hashem and observing his commandments. So this was addressed earlier on in chapter 17 in general. But now in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to take us a little further into this. It gets a little Kabbalistic in the middle of this chapter, so just hold on to your horses as we make our way through here. It's a bit of a lengthy chapter, but I'll do my best to do it justice. All right. Page 387. Let's further clarify further the term so that you can do it. That's the end of the verse I just quoted before. The entire verse he brings down here, like in the commentary from the Torah, is for this body of commandments which I am commanding you this day is not concealed from you, nor is it far away. Rather, the thing is very much within reach for you in your mouth and in your heart so that you can do it. So the point is that ultimately everyone else can do this. What is this so that you can do it ultimately? I mean, what, as he puts it over here, we're left with the question, why did God give most of us just enough love to do the mitzvot and not more? It's a struggle enough just to do the mitzvahs. It's like, and then more and more and more. Where does it end? Also, let's try to get some minimal insight into the reason for which Beinanim were created in this way. Remember, the focus of the book of Tanya is the Beinanim. So that's why he's discussing that as the life of the Beinanim, because in Potentia, all of us can get there. So as we learned above, a person does not really have free choice whether he'll be able to surpass the level of Beinani, external mastery, and attain the level of tzaddik. Why has God created most of us in a way where we cannot rid ourselves of evil? Doesn't God want us to get rid of evil? But we're not created with the abilities. So if that's the case, then what's all the struggle about? Right? So he says God could have created us in such a way that the divine soul and animal soul each have independent access to the body. What he actually did was to enmesh the two, and the result is that if the divine soul wants to access the body, it must do so through the medium of the animal soul. In other words, anything the godly soul wants to do within our body has to be done through the animal soul. Why? Because what does the animal soul ultimately is what vivifies, gives life to our physical body. Our eating, our drinking, our sleeping, all the physical needs that we have are taken care of through the animal soul. The godly soul could care less. It doesn't care whether you eat, drink, sleep, has no interest in the physical world at all. So ultimately, the only way the godly soul is able to fulfill its mission, which is what? That we fulfill mitzvot, whatever it may be, study Torah, is using the vehicle of the animal soul, the body, which vivifies the animal soul, to get its job accomplished. So God, in reality, could have created two separate entities. Not that the godly soul's enmeshed and the animal soul has no choice but to deal with it. Could have made it easier. You have your thing, I have my thing, and we can respectfully disagree with each other and get along, so to speak. It's not the way it works. The way it works is there's a daily battle with the godly soul, which is enmeshed in the animal soul, and trying to convince somehow the animal soul to use the body, the physical body, in a godly way and fulfilling mitzvot. So Beinanim seem doomed to an endless struggle since they cannot send her, meaning the animal soul, away all their days. They're stuck with it, and dislodge the animal soul from its place in the heart's left chamber, so that the animal soul shouldn't cause inappropriate thoughts to rise to the brain. Because it's essentially, the old saying is that the heart desires. So where does a person's desire and passion come from? Well, ultimately everything comes from the brain, but although that's true, but when we talk about the heart, the passions of the heart, we don't talk about the passions of the brain. Why? Because typically that's the seat of your emotion. So essentially, it's like from the heart that creates, so to speak, this level of desire or whatever it may be to things which are antithetical to God, and then from there it goes on to the head for the head to start thinking inappropriate thoughts. So that's a constant struggle. Page 388. For in the case of the Beinanim, the deep core of the animal soul from Klippa remains as strong and powerful as when they were born. It's only that the animal soul's garments of impure thought, speech, and action are unable to influence the body due to the Beinani's self-mastery, because the Beinani's work so hard on himself that he has such self-control that he's able to. Is the door locked? He's open. What? Someone come in or?
Yes, honey.
Oh, okay. So the Beinani's worked so hard on himself, and that's why it's the only reason why his three garments of the soul are not, so to speak, overtaken by the animal soul or by the animalistic desires. In Cain, so since this is the case, we're left with the question: why do the souls of Beinanim have to come down to this world for a war which can't be won? It's one thing if you're going to go to war and you have the potential to win. If you never have a shot from the beginning, from the get-go, why go to war? What's the purpose of the war? Liga Larei Chas V'Sholem Lilachem Kaimim and Mayetzav Lechulai. So it's basically a war that can't be won for a futile struggle, God forbid, to battle in vain with the impulse to evil all their days, unable to prevail over it. That's the question that we're addressing here. So why? What's the purpose behind all this? So the next section is the Kabbalistic one, the Zohar on the power of a mitzvah. To address this question or this concern, the Tanya teaches us a passage from the Zohar. Let this be their consolation from the book of Job. To offer them comfort with a double measure of wisdom. And to let their hearts rejoice with God, who is present with them in their Torah and worship. Here's the Zohar. So we first need to examine the teaching of the inspired child, known as the Yenuka, in the Zohar portion of Balak. On the verse, quote, a wise man has eyes in his head. This is from Ecclesiastes. What is that supposed to mean? Wise man has eyes in his head. Doesn't everybody have eyes in their head? Who doesn't have eyes in their head? I understand, but everybody has it. Where else are your eyes, if not in your head? They're not on your feet. So what is this verse from Ecclesiastes telling us? So then Zohar explains, Zohar asks, and what other place would a man's eyes be? Okay, might they be in his body, his arm, such that King Solomon, the wisest of all men, who wrote this verse, is letting us know otherwise. Rather, the Zohar answers, the verse definitely has the following implication, page 389. We've learned that a person should not walk 4 cubits with his head uncovered, not wearing a yarmulke, for a man. My timer, what's the reason? Because the divine presence rests on his head, and the eyes and words of every wise man are, quote, on his head, meaning to say he's focused, and that which rests and remains on his head, which rests and remains on his head, which is what? Upon the Shekhinah, the divine presence. And when his eyes are there, he's conscious of the divine presence. Linda He'll be aware that the flame lit above his head is in need of oil. Begin to gufat varnashi psilon uher adak leilas. Since a person's body is a wick and with a flame lit above it. Okay, so the wick is us, the body, the flame above it is God, the divine presence. And King Solomon shouts out to us, don't allow oil to be lacking from your head. Right? In order for the wick to burn, you have to have oil. So what does that mean? Because the flame on his head needs oil. And the oil refers to good deeds. That's the oil. You're not buying, WD-40, whatever. Okay? It's the good deeds that you do. And it was concerning this concept that the verse says, a wise man has eyes in his head. That's what King Solomon was referring to. This is the citation from the Zohar. So the Tanya now begins to unpackage this lesson. What is it ultimately teaching us? We're going to clarify the analogy where the light of the Shekhinah is compared to the light of a candle, which won't shine and grasp its wick without oil. And the same way the Zohar says, in a Shekhinah, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, won't rest on a person's body, which is compared to a wick, page 390, except through good deeds. So not extensively, exclusively. So in other words, the only oil, quote unquote, you can put into the body, so to speak, to ensure that the wick is going to burn. The wick is what? That flame is going to be the divine presence above you, is the performance of mitzvahs. That's the oil. The good news is it doesn't go up in price like current gas prices. The implication here is that the soul alone, despite the fact that it's a piece of God above, right? The soul is an actual part of Hashem, does not suffice to provide oil for the wick to cause the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to rest on the body. But if the soul is actually a piece of God, shouldn't that be enough to cause the Shekhinah to rest on the body? So it's like, hey, if my soul is not a part of God, fine, I understand. I have to make something, a vessel for God to come and rest on my body. But if my soul is a piece of God, which it is, then why can't the Shekhinah rest on my body? It's an extension of my soul is an extension of the Shekhinah, you would think. Right? Yes. It's not my question. Yes. It's the Altar's question. No, right. So now we have to figure out what is he talking about. Right. So why mitzvahs make the Shekhinah shine? Why can't it just shine without the mitzvahs? By the mere fact that my soul is an extension of God. Before I move on, so the answer will be clarified and explained for any intelligent person in the following lines. Now a person's soul, even if that person is a complete tzaddik, worshiping God with reverence and pleasurable love, like the highest levels of service. Nevertheless, that soul still does not lose its separate identity completely, which would enable it to become extinguished and literally absorbed in God's light and to merge completely with God in absolute unity. Rather, the soul retains its separate identity as one who is reverent of God and a lover of Him, but not one with Him. What does that mean? So, just to sum it up, let's assume here you have, infinite God right here, absolute infinity, in which basically nothing else has an identity. This is all absolute godliness, and the potential, everything exists here. Then the process, we learned this earlier about the process of tzimtzum, of God contracting Himself, concealing Himself, begins. So that ultimately things can start taking on definition. They're still part of God. Everything's part of God. But there's nothing defined over here. It's only after that tzimtzum process begins where you start having different names of spiritual worlds, the world of Atzilut, of emanation and creation, and so on and so forth, and also souls, even though our souls are part of a God. But once the soul is created as an individual soul, it's no longer just part of a mishkababel. That's the scientific term, over here. It has a definition. It's your soul. It's my soul. It's a soul that goes to a particular body. So at this point, it sort of has an identity unto itself, and it's not completely subsumed in God Himself here. It's connected to God, obviously, but it has an identity of its own. That's sort of the key. Let's remember that. We get that? Plate analogy?
But it's not physical. It's
not physical, but even spiritual things. Okay, we believe in spirituality. Even spiritual things that have an identity to them, have a name of sorts, on this highest level have no name. Their name only begins lower down once God starts concealing himself, more so, from within himself. But creating that concept of concealment, so that all of a sudden, let's say this is over here, this world of emanation, which is the spiritual world, all of a sudden it can have a name, world of emanation. Because up here, even though it exists in potentia, there's no definition of emanation. Follow?
It's not as concealed.
Here there's no concealment.
There's no concealment.
Here there's no concealment.
Yes.
Once you go down below that, that's where the concealments begin, and there are more concealments and less concealments depending on.
Is the soul kind of in concealment between the body and the flame?
No. So the point of the matter is that the soul is the creation of the individual soul is a form of concealment already.
Yes.
Without which it couldn't exist as an independent soul.
But we're asking the difference between the soul and.
So we're going to get to, so he's explaining now, why is it now that the soul needs, quote unquote, the mitzvot, the oil, to bring down the divine presence on the person's head, if the soul is automatically a part of God. But now the point is that the soul actually is an independent entity, right?
Yeah, everyone's born with its soul, and all our souls are different. They're not uniform.
They're all different. They're all independent souls.
They all have some kind of.
Well, because it's your soul.
Yes.
Your soul is specific to your body, to no one else, as is with anyone else's soul.
Yes, but maybe the flame does not.
The flame that's created is up to us. What that soul's going to do in the body. The soul does mitzvot, the body does mitzvot through the soul's urging. So then there's oil in the body and the flame is burning, so to speak. Yes.
So everybody has the potential of the presence of Hashem here. It depends what we.
Question is, what do we do to bring down that presence?
The soul provides for that flame.
The soul provides the potential to bring that flame, because the soul is ultimately what prompts the body to do the mitzvot. The animal soul doesn't care if you're doing mitzvot, not really interested. It's only the godly soul. But that godly soul is what brings about the potential to create that oil, if you will, the urge to do the mitzvot, thus bringing down the divine presence on the person's head, or oil for the flame, as in the analogy. Okay, Masha Ein Kain. The bottom of page 390. But this is not the case with mitzvot and good deeds, which are the will of God himself, totally merged with him. So they're not like independent entities like that of the soul. The mitzvah is the absolute will of Hashem. To clarify why any created entity, even the soul, can't receive the divine presence of Shekhinah, the Tanya will recap a lesson we learned earlier, page 391. Now, God's will is the source of life for all the worlds and creations. Okay, God's will, again, is the source of everything. And this source energy only passes down to the worlds and creations through many diminishments, concealments. And the hiding of God's face, so as to conceal the supernal will of God. And the multiple downgrading of God's light was necessary to make possible the existence and creation of something from nothing. Otherwise, we'd all be nothing. Up here, it's absolute nothingness. Okay? So in order for this something to begin to exist, there has to be this diminishment, if you will, or concealment of godliness. So that something, the consciousness of a separate entity, and would not be overwhelmed by God's light so much that it would lose its separate sense of being, as described above. We studied this earlier. So this diminishment of light does not happen with the mitzvot. It happens with us, with our soul being vested in our body. But the mitzvot themselves is not a diminishment. Why? Because they are the inner, undiluted will of God. Over there, on the inner, undiluted will of God, there's no hiding of God's face. As a result, their energy, the energy from the mitzvot, is not separate from God at all. As the mitzvah is not separate from God, the energy from that mitzvah is also not separate from God. Rather, they are merged with and absorbed in the will of God, and they are totally united and seamlessly merged with His will. Okay, so if you want to be absolutely connected to God, intimately connected with Hashem, the way to do it is specifically through the performance of mitzvot. Because what are the mitzvot? It's the inner will of God. On the level of the inner will of God, there's no independent identity. It's God's core essence. And by that token, it's the energy which is elicited by fulfilling those mitzvot is also coming from the inner will of God and not an independent identity. So now you're energizing the oil that you're bringing down is what? Is coming from the inner will of God, no independent identity, and thus allows the divine presence to rest on your head, the flame to burn. It sort of diminishes to a large degree the person, the individual, the I, the id. I have to put myself aside. I'm willing to take from the inner will of God, right, where there's no concealment whatsoever. I want to bring that into myself, into my body, to allow the divine presence to properly rest upon me. But it requires me putting my interests, my animalistic interests aside, and ultimately fulfilling what the godly soul wants me to do. Still with me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not so menos? Kind of, sort of, maybe? Okay. Bottom of 391. The loss of separate identity is a crucial point here. As the Shekhinah, the divine presence, cannot be present if another identity blocks the way. Okay? So you have something blocking the divine presence from coming down, it's a problem. Now, the meaning of the Shekhinah, the divine presence resting on something, is that godliness and the blessed infinite light is openly manifest in that thing. Which means that the thing is absorbed in God's light, page 392, and has completely lost its separate identity in the presence of that light. Because it's only then that we can really say the reality of one God rests and is manifest in that thing. Since if the thing retains its identity, we have two and not one. Because then you have the thing and you have God. But so long as the thing hasn't lost its identity completely to God or in God, the light of one God, the Shekhinah, won't rest and be revealed there. So now going back to your initial question, while at worship, the tzaddik may not be self-aware because he's subsumed in godliness during davening, and he may feel utterly immersed in thoughts of God, but the fact that he doesn't feel his identity during davening, let's say, doesn't mean he's lost it. He hasn't lost his identity. And this remains as a blockage for the Shekhinah. So in fact, even the tzaddik's thoughts, forget the Beinoni here, the tzaddik's thoughts, the righteous man's thoughts about God are mortal conceptions which cannot grasp the truth of divine reality. So remember, the tzaddik, the abject tzaddik, is the highest of high levels that any human being can even reach. But still in all, that tzaddik still has a limitation. Why? Because the tzaddik is a physical human being. As a physical human being, I can't really truly grasp what is beyond my capacity, anything which is infinite, God ultimately. So I have all kinds of analogies to use and different means of understanding. A, B, C, or D, I can understand certain things exist, but do I really know what it is? No, I can't. It's not possible. So he says, the Afsad Gomor, even a complete tzaddik who is bound to God with great love cannot be a vehicle for the light of one God to be revealed, because in truth, no thought can grasp him at all, Hashem. Since this thought exists in a separate being. Remember, the tzaddik is thinking. So the tzaddik is a being. He is thinking. A separate being is thinking. And the reality of God, the true God, is non-dual oneness. There's no second anything. There are no separate beings. That he is the only one. And there's absolutely nothing other than him. So separate consciousness is an ineffective tool to grasp the reality that there's no separate existence. It's rather like proving, this was interesting, that notion. It's rather like proving that you don't exist while looking in the mirror. Okay? So the logic may make sense in your mind, but you know that you're really there because you're looking at yourself in the mirror. So here's my mirror. I don't exist. I don't exist, but I do exist. Now, in my mind, I don't exist, but it's showing otherwise. It's a bit of a mind game, but in reality, that's what. So if you want to use separate consciousness to grasp a reality that there is no separate existence, it's a little difficult to do, because we are by nature, as a human being, I'm a separate consciousness, independent, separate consciousness other than absolute godliness, right? Because I'm an independent person, was an independent mind who thinks however I think, and I have limitations to my thoughts. Using that brain with its limited understanding, what have you, or as a separate consciousness, how am I supposed to be able to grasp a separate existence? How am I supposed to grasp the concept that there's no separate existence? I am a separate existence. Everything around me is a separate existence. So how is this separate existence supposed to grasp something which is not a separate existence? It's like, again, me talking to mirror saying I don't exist. Everybody get that? Another cup of coffee? No? The aim came, excuse me. The aim came, Zeha Oyev, Shuyesh V'lei Efes, Leis Machshav Tis Beklal. And if this is the case, then a person who loves God, since he is a separate entity and not nothing, amid such a consciousness of separateness, no thought of his can grasp him at all. And then the light of God won't rest and be revealed in him through thinking or feeling about God, because you're by definition a separate consciousness. If God only rests on things which are not separate from him, then I being a separate consciousness have no fighting chance to have God rest upon me, because I'm always going to be a separate consciousness. So how do I get around that? So the answer is, rather, God's presence will rest through observing the mitzvot. Why? Which are the undiluted will and wisdom of God, page 393, Lishum Hesher upon him, without any hiding of God's face, as we will discuss further below. So, if I'm not willing to observe the mitzvot, I have no fighting chance, because I'm a separate entity. Where does God rest? Where there's non-duality, there's no second anything, no any other separateness. But by definition, since I'm separate, that means then God somehow is not going to rest upon my head. So Hashem figured that out too, and he said, not a problem. You're right. In concept, that's true. The way that you can actually make it happen specifically is through the only through the performance of mitzvot. Because at that point, the mitzvah is coming from my core essence, Hashem says. It's the core essence, the inner essence of God. On that level, on the inner essence, up here, there's no separateness. It's all one thing. Once that happens, all of a sudden, godliness now can come down and rest upon my head. Act the mitzvahs act as the oil for the wick, so on and so forth. We're up to the footnote on page 393, below the line. So note, the Tanya stated that in a separate entity such as the soul, the light of God won't rest and be revealed. In that note, we'll explore the Kabbalistic sources of this teaching. This follows what I heard from my teacher of blessed memory, the Magen Mizrich, just the Alter Rebbe's teacher, who offered an explanation and reasoning of what is written in Eitz Chaim, a very deep Kabbalistic writing. That the blessed infinite light will not merge even with the highest godly world of Atzilut, that's the world of emanation, the first, for all intents and purposes, of the first of the four spiritual worlds, except by first becoming enmeshed within the Sphira, this level of Chachma, of wisdom, and only afterwards will the blessed infinite light spread to the other Sphirot of Atzilus. What does that mean? So God's infinite light is incompatible even with the world of Atzilus, which is the highest of high, which contains only divine attributes. But how could the divine be incompatible with the divine? That doesn't seem to work. How can God not be compatible with God? Right? Should start his class at 6 o'clock instead of 7:30. So, because ultimately, even though the attributes of Atzilus are godly, they do have a defined identity. God's kindness, God's discipline, that's an identity, right? It's an attribute of God. And that identity acts as a blockage for the blessed and infinite light, which is devoid of any limitation. So the moment I speak about one of God's attributes, I'm creating a definition, right? It's no longer up here with no definition. God's kindness means it's kindness and not judgment or severity, or God's judgment is not kindness, so on and so forth. So, and that's what this concept, even the world of Atzilot was an extremely high spiritual world, but it already has a name. So God says godliness does not come down into the world of Atzilot without first being manifest in Chachma, which is the first of this 10 sfirot, right? Wisdom of Atzilot. So he explains why. What's the notion of it coming through Chachma first? So he says, this is because the blessed infinite one is the only true one, and he is the only one, as a liturgy in high holidays, and there is no other besides him. An energy which is incompatible with the defined godliness of Atzilus. The exception to this is Chachma. Since Chachma's identity, the wisdom's identity, is not centered around itself, and it is predominantly in inquisitiveness and openness to the other powers. To the other, bottom of page 394, below the line. Since it does not have a self-identity, it is open to receive that which is above, and can act as a portal for the blessed and infinite light to enter. And this consciousness represents the level of Chachma. So this sheds some light on why the tzaddik soul, even though it's a piece of God, it can't receive the Shekhinah, if even the divine attributes themselves can't receive the undistilled light of God, because at some level those attributes are entities to themselves. Certainly then the soul, which really is a separate entity found in your body, can't act as a natural recipient for the Shekhinah. Any questions on that? Good. Huh? Don't be afraid. I don't bite. Not on a regular basis anyway, you know. You want me to re-explain? Did we get it or?
No.
Okay, so
Can you go over?
I will try to explain this using my arts and crafts. Let's say for argument, here you have again, orange, infinite light of God. Nothing has definition here. Just everything exists here in potentia. Every spiritual world, every attribute of God is all here in potentia with no definition. Then God creates this concept of tzimtzum, diminishment, concealment, to allow, quote unquote, things to take on an identity. Our souls, God's attribute of kindness, God's attribute of judgment, the world of Atzilot. All these things only happen post tzimtzum, or in the process of tzimtzum. Now, the highest world of the 4 spiritual worlds we learned earlier in Tanya is that of Atzilot, right here, which is the world of emanation, extremely high level of godliness, which is far and beyond anybody's comprehension whatsoever. But before this level of godliness can even come into here, it has to stop because this is already an identity. Yes. It has a name. It's Atzilus. Yes. So there's the highest level of Atzilus right at the top. I'm running out of things right here. This is my level. Is Chachma. This is the wisdom of Atzilus. First, the godliness has to come into this. And then once it comes into Chachma, it's able to now make its way through the various other levels within Atzilus down the ladder of concealment, diminishment, to the physical world down here, many, many levels lower. Why is it necessary to have this at the top? Because Chachma in and of itself, although it has a name to it, but it basically is not considered to be an entity unto itself. Because it's only created to be able to act to share, so to speak, with anything beneath it. It's not like it says, I want this, okay, and then I'm going to give you whatever I want from my portion. Chachma only acts really to a large degree as like a springboard, if you will. From this comes into here, and then from here it's springboard. It can go into whatever the lower levels there are there afterwards. So even though it has a name attached to it, but it's different than the levels beneath it, which is that of Bina, understanding, the world of meditation, contemplation, where things start to take on a definition. The world of Chachma, nothing's defined whatsoever. Okay, it's called the seminal point, the seminal thought, meaning that when you have a brainstorm, that first bolt of lightning that hits your head, okay, which you can't even describe what it is. You don't even know what it is yet, but it's a brainstorm. That's Chachma. This all happens in a split second. From Chachma now, all of a sudden, okay, I came up with this brainstorm. Now I got to figure out what is it. I can't even tell anybody what it is yet because I don't understand it myself yet. So in my mind, it goes through the process of Bina, the meditative, the contemplative level, right? until I understand it enough where it becomes part of das. Das is knowledge, literally, which means that the subject matter becomes so entwined with me that it's like a part of me. If you woke me up in the middle of the night, I can spit it out because it's not like just spitting back information I don't understand. The level of das, I really understand it well. It's inexorably connected to who I am. You follow?
It's at the moment where there is no real form. There's some.
Now, Chachma is not really a form yet. Correct. It's not. You can't define it. There's nothing definable. And because it's not definable, it doesn't have definition. Remember? If it doesn't have definition, then it's like abject godliness.
I wish we had the chart.
I just gave the chart. I did the 4D chart.
Remember
No, but the whole chart.
Oh, you don't have, yeah.
That's all right.
I think we're getting lost when you talked about the blockages, because it sounds like you said it's a blockage.
Because the moment something is created with a
Right.
definition, by definition, it becomes the concealment / blockage.
So,
How do I remove that blockage?
right.
Okay. So the answer ultimately is in my own life, the only way to remove that block is by doing mitzvot. Because then I'm bringing in I'm bringing the fuel, so to speak, to allow the godliness to burn upon top of my head.
So let me, because I want to make sure I'm understanding this. So, God created us and brought the concealment, right? Has come down. And the goal is to now go try to come back up and take away.
Correct.
Am I understanding that right?
It is to go back up, but it also means more
Trying to
so,
get back up to it.
but it's more so bringing God back down to this world.
Okay, that's okay.
More than you going up. I mean, by
Okay.
definition, you're
And
gonna
then
connect.
about,
Yes,
I'm
but is
thinking about Zushi's class with it showed, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
But yeah. The class last year.
oh,
Yeah,
I wasn't invited.
That's the chart we saw, and that's why.
Okay, unfortunately, I don't have the.
And down.
But I like it when you inserted that because.
Yeah, that made me
was
understand
very-
better.
Yeah.
That's why I brought the
Well,
arts and crafts in,
Like
show and tell.
Like a form of
So,
transportation taking you to the next.
I mean, to a large degree, that's what it is. But the mitzvahs
It gets it down to the
so the mitzvahs allow you, quote unquote, to take the train upward. You know,
back upward, yeah.
right? That's basically what it boils down to.
so the soul directs the body to perform the mitzvahs, to get the oil for the.
Right, but that's the fight. That's the war.
That's the war.
Am I bringing
for
in
the
oil or
fire.
am I not bringing in oil?
Right.
For the fire.
Well, because the
Right.
body is the vessel.
The
right?
body's a vessel which is largely run by the animal soul.
Right.
That's the godly soul now has to use the animal soul to get what it wants.
Right,
Okay, so it's not like you can say, I don't need you, I'll do it without you. There is no
Right.
doing it without you. Doesn't have a choice.
And the godly soul is obviously more revealed than, Chachma or.
The godly
our
soul,
goal, the soul within us is less, is more. Is less revealed than, it would be less revealed.
there's less level of revelation than the
Yeah.
level of Chachma
in
Batzilus.
the Chachma. Okay.
So, and not to confuse you, I do a good job doing that. So you spoke about the 10 sefirot, right? And I have a chart to show you. So the highest one is that of Chachma in the world of Atzilus, Chachma, Bina, Dat, etc. That same template exists within my soul. In addition to that of the spiritual worlds, the same template exists within my soul. There's Chachma within my soul. There's Bina within my soul. Das within my soul, etc. Same names, albeit they're called the 10 powers of the soul, as opposed to the 10 sefirot above. So
Oh, there's spirit above that.
the 10 sefirot, what I'm talking about here is one of the sefirot, the world of Chachma is one of the sefirot, Chachma Batzilot. Okay, there's
Are they all?
Yeah.
I can't remember. I just remember the Chachma being with Bina, with Tiferet,
so it
and the
starts with
Torah,
Chachma. I don't know if you can be able to read it if I write right.
So
It's,
when I was asking about transportation, is it like the Chachma helps bring down? Because you said there's no blockage or boundary until you get, it's the first.
so Chachma, because it doesn't really have an identity unto
Right.
itself. There's nothing identifiable
It's
with.
right on top of
right on top of Atzilus, which now enables the rest of the world of Atzilus to have godliness come
Because
into it,
now that's there, it kind of helps it to
come down
come
further.
down. That's what I
It's
was,
the
okay.
initial,
Okay.
it's before the thought. You just have something inside of you just says, I have it.
Yeah.
And it becomes a thought.
Yeah, I'm writing them down. That's code.
But these are, but
These are
this,
the 10. I'm not sure.
they're not really in this.
These are the
they're
10
not
spheroids.
in
If you
that
can read them.
order.
Okay.
Oh, Marilyn.
There you
Yeah,
go.
so, but
That's
then
in order.
is there Chachma
This
different?
is Chachma. This is the 10 spheroids here.
Okay,
10.
that's different than the Chachma we're talking about now.
No, this
No,
is
this
this
is
is
big.
this
No.
is
It's the same.
okay. Then you have 4 worlds. I'm running out of paper over here. But okay,
This
Atzilut.
is your plate. for
Yeah. Okay.
the-
Atzilut
Just so you're
Bria.
not, just to realize that.
Yetzira and Asiya. Okay.
Yeah,
These,
that's supposed to be- I was like, I want you to read that.
so here's your 4 worlds. I don't know if you can see what I wrote here. Atzilut. Okay. Atzilut Bria Yetzira. Those
Yeah.
are 4. What are known as the 4 worlds, spiritual worlds. Each one of those worlds has these 10
Yes,
sphirot in them.
yes.
So there's 10 sphirot
Yeah.
within the world of Atzilut, 10 sphirot in the
Yes.
world of Bria,
Yes.
10 sphirot in the world of
Okay.
Yetzira, 10 Nasiya.
Yes,
Each one leads one into the next. It's basically what's called cause and effect.
yes.
Okay, so for example, Chachma, the highest level of Atzilut. I can't see what I'm doing here, but
Yeah,
Chachma of
yeah.
Atzilut
Yes,
becomes the cause to Bina of Atzilut.
yes.
Bina of Atzilut, which now is the effect from Chachma, right?
Yes.
Then that becomes the cause to Dat of
Dat.
Atzilut,
Yes.
which then becomes the cause to, and so on and so forth, as it goes all the way down. That's basically the gist of it. And thank you to,
To get back to what I was asking before when I said about going back up. So then the goal, I don't know if that's the right term, that we find in ourselves when these things come up in us is to do the mitzvahs to come back,
To bring.
to bring us back closer
not-
to God. I know it's bring God down, but it's,
it is, but they're one and the same.
okay, yeah, okay.
Ultimately, it's about creating this connection between yourself and God, bringing godliness down into this physical world, basically allowing me, more so
Okay.
in a more revealed way. Otherwise, godliness always exists. The question is, am I connecting to that godliness?
Right.
So there's a Chachma in
Mhm.
Asiya and
Yes.
Yitzhira and.
And all of them.
You know.
So I know this is about us as Jews, but my question is, especially since there's a lot of people who don't know that they may have Jewish in them. Is this for everybody or is this just?
No.
Okay, so it's just for Jews, but what about someone who?
No, well,
doesn't-
these worlds exist independent of human
Right, I know
beings.
they
There's nothing to do with
exist.
people. No,
Right.
they connect to God, non-Jews, let's say.
Yeah,
Connect to God, but on a different level. In other words,
Okay.
they don't have a godly soul like we have. They have an animal/vital soul. A Jew has 2 souls. That's the
Mhm.
difference. A non-Jew does not have 2 souls. They have 1 soul, which is called an animal/vital soul, like we also have.
Mhm.
But in addition, we have what's called an nefesh, the godly soul, which is an actual part of Hashem. The exception to that is it says regarding those who are the righteous Gentiles, as to where their souls come from.
Mhm.
The righteous Gentiles are those who fulfill the 7 Noahide laws because God commanded them to do so. So it says that their quote unquote animal soul, if you will, comes from a higher place.
Yes.
Okay, from Klipa Snaiga, sort of an admixture of good and bad, and they're able to connect themselves spiritually on a much higher level than otherwise available.
okay.
Since Jews are commanded to fulfill 650 mitzvot, that's how these are what we're talking about here.
Mhm.
That's our oil. That works for Jews. What works for the Jews does not work for the non-Jews and vice versa.
Okay.
It's not a matter of better or worse. It's a different
Different.
system. Hashem created this system for the Jewish people. He chose us from amongst the nations 3,300 some odd years ago at Sinai. And he says the way if you want to connect to me, this is the way you connect to me. For non-Jews, they have had the 7 Noahide laws, as I mentioned before. And that's how they connect to God, by fulfilling those 7 Noahide laws. A non-Jew has no mitzvah to fulfill Shabbos.
Right.
On the contrary, they're not even allowed to keep Shabbos completely. Okay, because Shabbos is something which is specifically reserved for the Jewish people, spiritually speaking, in terms of their connection to Hashem. So each one has its own path, if you will,
Yeah.
of connecting to God. They all have to connect to God in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
The question is
I
how.
would realize.
So
So the paths are different.
What are
Right.
the other two commandments for the Noahide?
There's 7.
There's 7.
Seven.
Oh, the
It's do not-
I mean,
do
the
not-
other two that they, or the 3 that they don't observe.
What?
What do you mean?
Well, if there are 10, if there.
No, it's not
No.
10. It's not the same thing as the
It's
10
not-
Commandments.
not
It's do not, the 7 Noahide laws were given to Noah in the sun. It's pre-Sinai. Okay, so one is do not steal, do not commit murder, do not commit adultery, do not commit idolatry,
Yes.
okay? Not to blaspheme God's name, curse in God's name.
Yeah.
Another one is to create like a judicial system, a court system, if you will, and not to, literally says not to tear off a limb from a live animal, which means not to cause unnecessary harm to animals.
Yes.
Those are the 7 Noahide laws, and there's subsets of those as well, because when it speaks about adultery, it's not only the literal interpretation of adultery,
Right.
Of a married, woman having a relationship with a married man, another married man, but even other types of sexual acts which are considered to be
Yeah.
immoral, what have you. Okay,
That's
so do you have another question?
I did, but I don't remember now, so it's okay. Something for next
You
week.
had that look,
It'll pop back in my
Let's see.
We're going home tonight.
We're having a senior moment. Hold on, everybody. You're entitled to one a day. Okay, so back to page 393. So the Torah study is, of course, a mitzvah, but the Zohar stressed that good deeds, practical mitzvot, are necessary for the Shekhinah to rest on your body. The Tanya will now clarify why this is the case. Page 393 above the note, okay? Now, when a person is immersed in Torah study, then his soul, namely his divine soul, along with just its 2 inner garments. How many souls does the soul? How many garments does the soul have? 3. So what are the 2 inner garments? The 2 highest ones are speech and thought.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the powers of speech and thought. That's what it says. Page 394. Are absorbed into the infinite light of God and merged with it seamlessly. And this is the meaning of the term resting of the Shekhinah, the divine presence on his divine soul. As our sages of blessed memory taught, that even if one person sits and is immersed in Torah, the divine presence is with him. So Torah study, however, only draws down the Shekhinah upon the divine soul and its 2 inner garments of thought and speech. It does not affect the action garment of the divine soul or any of the animal soul's garments, nor the body. It only affects the 2 higher levels of the godly soul. But in order to pull the light and glimmer of the Shekhinah upon the body and the animal soul too, the animal soul being the energizing soul, which actually interacts with your body. So then you need to observe practical mitzvot, which are actually carried out using the body, because then your body's actual energy invested in the mitzvah act is absorbed in God's light and his will, page 395, and is merged with God's will seamlessly. And the sole power which motivates the observance of the practical mitzvot is the 3rd garment of the divine soul, which is the garment of action. So and then when the divine soul's garment of action powers a practical mitzvah, the energizing animal soul from klipas noiga, right, that's the admixture of good and bad, which interacts directly with the body, is temporarily transformed from evil to good and is actually absorbed into holiness like the divine soul itself. So you're transforming the animal soul at that point into a godly one. So this answers the questions posed earlier in the chapter. Why was it necessary to enmesh the divine soul into the animal soul? Why couldn't the divine soul have been given its own independent access to the body, right? Why create all this havoc? So while the animal soul will never really change in its deep core, at the moment when a practical mitzvah is observed, the enmeshment relationship forces the divine soul to partner with the animal soul in order to access the body, because without which, right, the divine soul without the animal soul can't do anything. And the result is the Shekhinah rests on the animal soul too. So now you've transformed, not only obviously the godly soul is godly, but now once you did the mitzvah, you actually transformed the animal soul also, and the body, to doing God's will. So, the Shekhinah rests on the animal soul because it is the one that caused the mitzvah deed. Okay, remember the animal soul is what gets your body moving, gets your hands to move, what have you. So that's what caused the mitzvah deed. Without that, there is no mitzvah. There's no potential for a mitzvah being done and performed it. And without the animal soul, the divine soul will have no influence on the body at all. Since the animal soul was a crucial player in making the mitzvah take place, it acts as a medium through which the Shekhinah's presence can shine. So he says that for the divine soul is purely spiritual, and the body only physical and material, and the intermediary between them is the energizing animal soul, which interacts with the blood found in the person's heart and the rest of the body. So which means basically the animal soul provides a crucial function in enabling the divine soul to communicate with the body, which is why the Shekhinah is able to rest on the animal soul. Okay, last section. The Shekhinah, how can the Shekhinah rest on Klipa? Remember, we said, where's our animal soul, as a Jew in particular? You have an animal soul. The animal soul comes from Klipas Nega, which is the admixture of good and bad. Because our animal soul can propel us to do either good things, transform the animalistic desires to godly ones, or I can act in an animalistic way, and then that energy is going down to the 3 klipot of impurity. Okay, the same desires that I have to be godly emanating from my animal soul can also take the opposite approach and feed, the side of immorality. So the conclusion we've come to here is striking. Without a mitzvah, even a tzaddik can't cause the Shekhinah to rest on his divine soul, even though that soul is a piece of God. Why? Because ultimately the divine soul has its own separate identity, which, quote, blocks the Shekhinah. Because remember, it has an identity. They're talking about the blockage. The moment something has a name, automatically it's a blockage. It's a definition. It's a limitation. Yet with the mitzvah, the Shekhinah will even rest on the animal soul and the body, which are from Klipa. So this leaves us with an obvious question. Why does the Klipa of the animal soul, an energy which conceals and opposes God's unity, not cause the Shekhinah's presence to be blocked? Okay? So remember, if my animal soul, which is a blockage, is a big blockage to godliness, why is that helping, quote unquote, to bring down the divine presence and not acting as a larger impediment or a bigger blockage to God coming into my world? So the answer is Vavshamahusva on page 396. So even though the deep core of the animal soul found in your heart, which is namely its negative traits, still have not been absorbed into holiness, and they remain a force of klipa, like all my temptations and like non-godly temptations. Nevertheless, it's still possible for the Shekhinah to rest on the animal soul and its powers, since they've been coerced into a holy activity by the godly soul. And against their will, the powers of the animal soul voice their agreements, like answering Amen, and their consent to and approve of mitzvah observance, as a result of a strengthening of the divine soul in the brain, which rules over the heart. So, where is the primary residence, going back a while ago, where is the primary residence of the godly soul in the body? It's in the brain. The primary residence is in the brain. Part of it's also in the right ventricle. Where's the primary residence of the animal soul within the body? In the left ventricle of the heart. So in reality, what's supposed to happen is it says that your brain should dictate to your heart what to do, and not vice versa. When do we get in trouble in life? When I just listen to what my heart desires. I'm not thinking straight, but I wanted it. Okay, it could be any emotion, it could be anything. It's not good, right? So really what should happen is they tell you, use your head. Think first, right?
Yeah.
Is this really going to be good for me? And then dictate from here to here as to how things should go down and what should happen. And not vice versa, which is the case in many cases when we get into trouble. We didn't think first, right? We just acted on impulse or whatever it may be. And at that moment of the mitzvah, the deep core of the animal soul and its powers are in a state of exile and dormancy, as explained above. So when a person does a mitzvah, you're basically putting your animal soul into a dormant state. It doesn't get rid of it, but it's dormant. Therefore, the dormant deep core of the animal soul doesn't hold back the Shekhinah from resting on your body at the moment of the mitzvah, because it's ineffective, it's not moving. Turns out that while the powers, page 397, turns out that while the powers of your animal soul are actively coerced into performing a mitzvah, the deep core of your animal soul simply remains passive and dormant during the act. So why then is the deep core of the animal soul crucial and indispensable to the mitzvah? It appears that the deep core wasn't involved at all. Just it was there. It didn't get in the way of anything. But why is it? It's not helping. It just doesn't get in the way. And if it wasn't involved, why should the Shekhinah shine through it? One thing if you stepped aside, fine. But if you're not an active participant, why are you getting rewarded in this case? Why is the animal soul getting rewarded? So Tanya addresses this point, saying, what happens is that the specific power invested by the energizing animal soul is observing the mitzvah with a specific part of your body, becomes literally absorbed in God's light and seamlessly merged with it. So it's only the specific power of the animal soul that is literally absorbed in God's light. Your hands, your feet, whatever it may be. It enjoys a full revelation of the Shekhinah, as does the body part which carried out the mitzvah. And as a result, it draws a glimmer of light upon the rest of the energizing animal soul as a whole, found throughout the body and also upon the physical body. So it affects the part of the animal soul that's helping to do the mitzvah. In addition, it basically affects the entire animal soul, which is manifest throughout your entire body. And then by extension, it affects positively all the limbs of your body, which are where the animal soul is ultimately living, right? Your blood system. So it's in your blood. It goes throughout the entire body. So ultimately, when a person does a mitzvah, every element of your body, obviously the godly soul, but the animal soul, all the animal soul, and all the limbs of your body become elevated and connected to Hashem. So the rest of the animal soul, including its deep core, is not literally absorbed in the Shekhinah since it was not directly involved in the mitzvah act. But since the animal soul and its powers are ultimately one entity, a glimmer of the Shekhinah does spread to it and to the whole body. But this glimmer only reaches the rest of the animal soul and the body in a secondary, disengaged fashion called makif, hovering outside the body from head to foot. So this is why, or explains why, the above citation from the Zohar is careful to say the Shekhinah rests upon the head, suggesting that it hovers from outside the person. Right? If something is on top of your head, it's above you, right, encompassing you. And similarly, over every 10 people, that is, the divine presence rests. The emphasis is also that the Shekhinah rests over them. So now, what are the levels of the Shekhinah? Chapter 35 concludes by addressing a philosophical issue. If the Shekhinah was not manifest initially and is only disclosed through Torah observance or mitzvot, does that not represent some sort of a change? How is this to be squared with the principle of God's non-dual oneness, which we have learned about, that God's presence never changes? Remember, there's a verse, we spoke about it earlier, it says that nothing changed with God, pre-creation, post-creation, it's the same God, nothing changed whatsoever. But here we're implying that there's change. So how does that work? Page 398. Every manifestation and expression of the Shekhinah's light, which is a revelation of the blessed infinite light, could not be termed a change in God, heaven forfend, nor expression of multiplicity. God is one, absolute one. Kedis b'Sanhedrin is the reason why this is the case, can be gleaned from what's stated in the Talmudic tractate of Sanhedrin. A certain heretic said to Rabbi Gamliel, who was one of the great sages of his time, you say that over every 10 the divine presence rests. How many Shekhinahs do you have? It's like, there's a lot of people, right? So how many Shekhinahs exist? So Rabbi Gamliel answered him, Rabbi Gamliel answered him with an example of sunlight from a single sun, which can enter through many windows. It doesn't change the sun, right? So the multiple manifestations and expressions of the Shekhinah only exist when viewed through the many windows of the recipient's perspective, our perspective. But from the true reality of God's perspective, his unity does not change through manifestation, just as the sun does not change when you open a window to let its light in. Whether you have your window open or not does not change the sunlight coming down from the sun. But Maskell Yavin and the wise will understand. which implies if you don't understand,
They're not wise.
I didn't say that. And anyway, so that was the easy part of this week's chapter. It's important to do some mind games every so often, later in the week and later at night. Something to keep you up at night. Did you get the gist of it? Anyway, even if you didn't get every little nuance, it's a little heavy duty chapter, but you get the basic idea. As I said when we started the class, if you were here in the beginning, I'm going through the Tanya quickly. For all intents and purposes, a chapter a week or chapter a class pretty much is a lot. Okay, you can spend months on one chapter and dissect everything, but my objective behind at least this course, is to give everybody a flavor for what Tanya is, the basic ideas. At some point, we go back again to the beginning and start studying Tanya a little more in depth. And there's far more in Hasidic philosophy. This is like the written Torah, the Bible of Chabad Hasidus, of which there are hundreds and hundreds of other books, all written on what it says in Tanya, explaining things in Tanya at great length. So this is like kind of scratching the surface.
Overview.
What? Well, it is. I mean,
So
once we finish part one, there's more parts.
how many more?
There's 5 sections to Tanya. This is the most lengthy. This is, I think, the most lengthy. Is the first one is we're up to chapter 36. So there's 52 chapters, 53 chapters. Sorry, in the first section of Tanya. Then it's called Shayichavem. There's the Epistle of Repentance. That's another 10 chapters or so. I think we have some of them here. Then there's Shayichavem Muna. It's a little more ethereal. It's a fascinating part of Tanya where the Alter Rebbe discusses basically creation, the concept of how God created the world through various permutations, the alphabet, the combinations of letters, and how each letter has its own energy. When you combine letter A with B or Aleph with Bet, etc., it spells out a particular word. Let's say, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the word for a stone in Hebrew. How do you say a stone? Evan, exactly. It's spelled Aleph, Vet, Nun. Okay? Those 3 letters, in that order of Aleph, Vet, Nun, give whatever divine energy is necessary through those letters for a stone to exist. So the Aleph has its own properties that add to the existence of the stone, as does the Vet, as does the Nun, but specifically in those orders, and not if you mix up the letters differently. And that's true with basically anything that was named, what have you. And every one of there's 22 Hebrew letters. Every one of those letters has its own divine energy, which is unique to that letter, that helps the world exist or helps whatever item that exists in the world retain its identity. There's that's the simple. Then there's gematria, there's numerical values of the letters. Then there's various permutations. There's certain letters which are guttural sounds, and other ones that you use your lips, like a bet sound, a mem sound. The other ones is guttural, a chet, etc. Each one has its own spiritual source too. There's a lot in there. I mean, I can't explain it all on one foot. That's kind of that section, which basically discusses the concept of like the higher levels of unification of godliness. It's called Yichudi Ilah, basically like the upper level of unity with God. But anyway, we'll hopefully get there as well. Then there's the last part of Tanya, which is actually parts of it are even more difficult to understand. But
More enough time with this.
yeah.
I was gonna say, whenever I drive by in LA, the Kabbalah Center, see the Kabbalah Center. So what do they do there?